everybody. I actually want to supplement the Europe question about can you get sued. In Europe, you can get sued if your clarity of when you're buying, you buy. It has to be a very specific text. And it cannot be confirmed, it cannot be continued, it has to be buy now, and it has to have a purchase in it. It's part of the EU regulations. So government's already going there. Speaking of monetization, that's what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, poll around the room, because I'm from SurveyMonkey. I always care about people's opinions. How many of you had your credit card reissued within the last year? Look around. What happened in the last year? Why is all of a sudden all of the credit cards being reissued all the time? Chip was a big one. Last October, it was a regulation that in US, all of the cards all of a sudden had to have chips. Now, whether we're actually using chips or not is questionable. Okay, we'll leave that behind. But also, what else is happening all the time now that is causing the credit cards to be reissued? Fraud and breaches into other companies. So Target has a breach, Home Depot had a breach. It's happening all the time. Why does it matter? It really matters a lot for recurring businesses or returning customers, because guess what? They're putting their credit card information into your product. They expect it to work, and it doesn't. How many of you had your service disrupted where it was turned off because your credit card payment failed? That's a lot around this room. Should it even happen? So this is what I'm going to talk about. So SurveyMonkey, who knows about SurveyMonkey? Woohoo, yes. How many of you have created a survey on SurveyMonkey? Nice, all right, okay. You're a little bit of an outlier here. But majority of people take surveys from SurveyMonkey and they think that they've used SurveyMonkey. It's very interesting because we look at SurveyMonkey of people that are actually creating surveys. You're just interacting with other people's surveys if you're taking it. But SurveyMonkey is a subscription-based product. There is a freemium offering for you to use at any time. And then there is a paid offering, which is a timely recurring model where you put in your credit card and then we charge you over and over again until you need our service. Okay, so retention is everything, right? So take a look at your forecast. Take a look at your bookings that are coming on any given year. Break up what percentage of the booking is coming in from returning or existing users versus brand new users coming through the door. And the older and older your business gets, the more and more that percentage of renewal bookings is going to grow. And it's going to get bigger and bigger, so it actually retention will become a major point of your focus. Because what do you want? Why is retention important? At the end of the day, you don't want to have a leaky bucket situation where you have to pour into it just as fast as things are coming out. So what is retention? You need to define what it is retention means for you. Retention can be engagement-based. I want to retain a user, I want to re-engage them, and that can be your retention KPI. Or it can be actually purely monetary-based. Now, you will say, okay, well, isn't one part of the other? Isn't retaining users from engagement will cause monetary retention? Yes, most of the time. However, you can pull some monetary retention triggers to keep retention high even without additional re-engagement. And that's the piece that I want to talk about because not a lot of people doing it. And whenever you get into a situation that your service got suspended from a company and you didn't even understand that you got a notification that you need to update your credit card, that was a lost opportunity. So this is what I'm going to talk about. In churn for monetary, the two groups that you should really classify your churn is voluntary and involuntary. What is voluntary churn? Users actually going to your site and saying, I am done. I no longer need you for now. Maybe I'll come back later, but I am proactively opting out of your service. Okay? What is involuntary churn? It's exactly what we're talking about of the payment failures, where you didn't mean to churn, but you churned because of the payment failure. And you need to really closely understand of what percentage of your churn in your company is actually driven from involuntary versus voluntary to gauge the opportunity of where you actually need to focus on. Now, to my point of in our world where there's so many breaches happening and there's so much turbulence in the credit card world, involuntary churn is something that you should focus some energy regardless, because it's going to have a pretty substantial impact and you can gain huge gains in it. All right, so as I said, involuntary is a renewal payment failure. Majority of the involuntary churn is affected on annual subscriptions if you have a subscription product. Why? Because it's been a year since last time you've charged that card. Lots of things happen in a year. So a lot of the time, especially if you have annual type subscription or the purchase cycle of your product is a little bit over about 6 months or so, this is going to be a huge opportunity for you. So what % of churn is involuntary? I very frequently look at the businesses in terms of, especially subscription-based. They have the first-term churn, second-term churn after the initial sign-up. And if you look at, for example, second-term churn, as much as 60% of it frequently comes as involuntary. Subscription-based, annual only. This is what I'm talking about right now. So there's quite a bit of opportunity there. Right? Almost half of your first-term churn can be potentially involuntary. Actually, seemingly goes down with terms, but it's funny because it actually goes up in volume, but as a percentage it goes down because more of it becomes either actual people turning off or refunds because people didn't mean to renew, for subscription-based specifically. But the volume actually keeps going up with every single term. So, if you fail that payment, what should your recovery strategy be like with the customer? This is an example of what we do at SurveyMonkey. There's different ways that you can develop it. Optimizing this sequence, which is not, I'm not showing you the entire sequence, has yielded incredible results to churn improvements to us once we did it about 3 to 4 years ago. So you have subscription start. Let's say you sign up today for SurveyMonkey paid plan. In a year, you're going to renew. So let's say the first renewal is 11/4/2017, and your payment fails. So what do? We wait 5 days, and then we shoot. So obviously, when payment fails, you shoot your email immediately. So then day 5, we email you again saying, hey, payment has failed, and we try again. Day 9, we email you again and try again. Day 12, we email you only. We're not going to keep trying your card every 3 days. That's just not unreasonable, and the bank is going to classify us as something that you should not be, that they're not going to authorize. Day 16, we email and we try, and a lot of potentially, in this case, success happens. So a majority of success will actually happen in the first 3 to 4 tries, but some of it can continue lingering on for on and on. So it doesn't mean that you have to just try once and give up. There's actually a method in the madness of keep trying again at certain frequency, not too long, not too short, and keep going. There's a couple of things that I do want to note in this. It's beneficial, especially if you have a subscription type business, to continue providing service during this retry period while you're trying the account. Why? You're making your accounting department happy because they don't have to rev-rec reconciliation of a subscription that now starting at the different time. And second of all, you're not interrupting the service to the customer. So they can continue using your product. They're not losing access. They're not losing momentum. They just need to update their card. And that way, when the user actually pays on that day 16, the sub is backdated to 11/4, and then they continue going. So, how long should you continue trying? We try for 45 days for annual users, so a month and a half, and for 20 days for a monthly user. It's okay to do it for quite some time. It actually, you get, and the reason that we do it is that we pretty much stop by the time we stop getting any incremental success. So the moment you stop getting incremental success, you say, okay, we're done. We're going to actually cancel the service, and we're going to suspend your account or suspend the access to your paid features, and you will have to truly resubscribe in order to return into our user base. But continue trying. One is not enough. So there's also different types of declines that you get from the bank. Bank will give you a reason of why the card declined. Now, it's not going to give you a very specific reason. So most of the time, it either falls into soft or hard declines. Soft declines are it's probably invalid, maybe insufficient funds, try again later. Majority of your failures will be soft decline, and that's why it actually works to be trying it over and over again. Now, hard declines are a lot harder. They're probably invalid, and they have actually very low chance of success. So the only way that you can succeed is actually get the user to actually update their credit card information in order to process the payment. So what should be your success rate after user fails payment? I would argue it should be over half. You should recover at least half of your failed payments. Now, some of it you will not recover, obviously, because people just don't want to. Maybe they meant to churn. They just forgot to turn off subscription for you. So you won't recover everybody. This also does not include people that will recover because they will just churn and then they will resubscribe at the later point. They just didn't recover in that period of time that you are giving them. So recovery here means that you actually paid in that cycle that you actually that we will continue trying you. And majority of it will be user-driven. So where does that take us? Well, if it's user-driven, then you actually have a chance to optimize, because that is the messaging to a user that you can make an action for them to come back and renew that payment and to update their payment information. And the other thing that I want to make sure that we talk about is that a lot of the businesses struggle in terms of how do you how do you measure that this success, and how do you categorize it in your KPIs? So, how do you categorize the success? Negative churn. It's the music to my ears, negative churn. We've considered your churn, and then you come back as a negative churn. I highly don't recommend you classifying it as a new paid account or returning new paid account or anything like that. It really should just be re-entering your paid subscriber pool and acting as a negative and offsetting your actual churn. Now, you shouldn't predict of how many people are going to fail. You don't want to say, okay, on this date, because they still have access to my paid app, I'm just going to continue counting them in my paid subscriber base. Why? Because some of them will never pay, and your numbers retroactively will continue shifting. So you don't want to do that. So consider them churn once they fall into this cycling, into this recycle pattern, and then once they actually come out, enter them back into the subscriber user base and count them as negative churn. And the one big thing that you need to pay attention to is what is your actual first-term churn and second-term churn. And when you have these types of failures that are very, very frequent, take 14-month for a 12-month subscription. Do more of a 45-day readout for your monthly subscriptions of 30 days. Why? Because you need to give some people some time to come back and to truly measure what's your first-term churn retention or your second-term churn retention. You would then need to have give them a little bit more time to actually recover before you actually call it a day and say, okay, this is how many people actually churn from my product. So that, and especially as you're putting those assumptions into your forecast model, this becomes very valuable, because otherwise you're overestimating your churn. You don't want to do that. So, speaking about optimizing user messaging, there's really two really big venues to do that. You can do it over email, and you can do it on site. There is a really big point on email. So email, a lot of the times people are not on the site specifically to actually notice that they failed into this payment cycle. So email is huge. So even if you're not trying card over and over again, sending that email reminder over and over again to a customer saying, hey, your payment has failed. Would you like to update it? Hey, you need to update your payment. So this is actually one of the emails that we send saying, hey, update your payment details. We're not trying to scare you into it. We're telling you, hey, you need to just update your payment information in order for us to continue providing that service. But that frequency is extremely important. If you get that frequency right, now don't be annoying. Don't be spamming people every single day. Nobody wants that. But to surface a reminder at least once a week or once every 2 weeks is extremely important to say, hey, don't interrupt your service, because actually the worst user experience is when they didn't mean to cancel and they got canceled anyways because their payment failed. And you go, wait, how did this happen? How come I didn't see it? And a lot of times it's because they don't even send you any notification. And this is the type of notification that I appreciate, and I'm sure you would appreciate as well, especially if it's one of the paid services that you're using. And such as message and CTA that you're using, don't go evil on it. Like don't go to saying we're gonna delete all of your data, or we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Really be friendly about it. These things happen. Update your payment information, and the CTA should take you specifically into the product, deep link it into actual payment updating information. Make it very seamless, make it very useful, because people are doing this all the time. The moment you get that credit card, you go, what subscription services do I have? Where do I need to update this card? So you wanted to make it as seamless as possible and as small of a hiccup as possible in your customer experience. But on site, if you do have an active user that is on site while this is happening, a persistent message is a must. It has to look a little bit of a warning, so put a little bit of an orange or red to it because this is an alarming message, but it shouldn't be too scary. But it should tell users very clearly, hey, your payment has failed. Please update it, click a button, pop up the payment module right there and have them update that payment. So it is extremely important. Otherwise people browse on your site and then they get surprised that their service all of a sudden gets suspended if they don't have it all the time in their face. And the other one that we've introduced, blocker module, it's not really a blocker, but every time you sign in into your site and your payment has actually failed with SurveyMonkey, we just pop up this module and say, would you all like to update it now? So you're still providing them service, so you still have enough leg to actually collect that payment right away. So you can get a little bit more aggressive in that time frame, but just don't be careful with the language because you don't want to get upsetting to people. Okay, and then there's optimization of your payment platform, and this one is a big one. Why? How many people have their own in-house billing system that actually process the payments versus how many are using the providers such as Stripe or PayPal in order to collect the payments? So majority of Stripe and PayPal. So here's the decision that you have to come to. What do I do? How big of an opportunity this for me to actually move past Stripe and PayPal and say I'm going to develop my own payment platform, my own billing system that's going to charge customers. I'm going to make relationships with payment processors such as Global Collect, Lidl, Adyen, and process payments through them. It's a huge decision that you have to make. It's a huge engineering cost. It's a huge product cost for you to maintain this over and over again. However, if you are processing or starting to process a lot of transactional volume, it will make sense because you can negotiate rates down and then you can actually define on which frequency you will bill people if they're failed payment processor versus if you go with one of the out-of-the-box payment processors, which are great for when you're starting up, you don't necessarily have a lot of control of what that afterlife looks like. Okay? So what are some other benefits of actually building your payment system in-house? So choice of payment processors I already talked about. It differs by country. It's very surprising. I didn't expect it, but different payment processors have different relationships by country, and they have higher auth rates with banks. So you don't necessarily just coordinate with one and just apply it broadly. The more and more you want to have a higher international presence, the more and more payment processors you want to partner with that are specific to that local market. They have very strong relationships with the bank and will have higher approval ratings. The other one is the other benefit is you can control more the bank categorization of your business. If you're a recurring business and your payment is actually classified as a recurring professional payment, it has a higher auth acceptance versus if payment from SurveyMonkey came, for example, as a clothing company categorization or some apparel, which will decline at that much higher rate. So you have ability to work with payment processor and say, hey, how are my payments getting classified in your top banks? And that can boost up your success rates. BIN number. So it's bank identification number. It's that first 4 to 6 digits on your credit card that are uniquely identifying which bank it's coming from and what type of customer it actually is. Is it a personal credit card versus if it's a business credit card? And that becomes very useful. It's not a full credit card number, of course, but it's just an identification to say, hey, which banks are failing you often and frequently, which banks are processing you very well, and which banks that you actually have big opportunity with. It gives you ability to actually store, get that information and do analysis on it. And lastly, of course, fee negotiation. Every single time you process a payment, they take something from you. Anywhere, anybody that you integrate with. But the bigger your volumes, the lower rates that you can actually negotiate with payment processors and save quite a bit of money from your expenses. Okay, so the last thing that I want to mention is really the following. So how do you actually track these numbers? What do you need to look at? So there's really three main metrics, I would say, that you need to make sure that you pay attention to. Number one, what percentage of your churn is involuntary? And we've talked about it already. Know it, live it, breathe it, monitor it. Because the moment you see your churn spike, you pretty much frequently you can have to look and say, okay, has there been a breach? Has there been a big reissuance of the card? Guess what happened somewhat recently? Costco switched from Amex to Visa. Guess what? Anybody who's been using their Amex with you, gonna fall into a payment processing loophole, because this just happens all the time. Fidelity, the same thing. They deprecated Amex and now they're having Visa, so they reissued all of the credit cards as well. So it's not even necessarily breach related. But you need to track it so you can differentiate in what is actually causing a churn of lack of engagement versus what is your churn that is just based on payment processing. Second of all, just look at, in terms of transactions that are coming up for renewal, what percentage of them fall into payment failure. You can call it however you want. We actually call it fall and retry because it goes into retry cycling logic. So pay attention to that number. And the last one is the success rate. So out of the payments that actually failed, how many of them are then succeeding? And then you have a full picture and you know, hey, is this area of my business doing good, especially from year-over-year perspective? I guarantee you it's going to look worse year-over-year every single year, probably for the last 3 years, period. But at least keep it in check in terms of, is it getting worse or is it actually just at least staying somewhat up and it's not getting worse anymore. So a lot of people, a lot of companies don't pay a lot of attention to it. Again, even if you're not controlling your payment processing, emails and online messaging on site can do wonders. So please pay attention to this. It's an easy, low-lying fruit. Thank you very much. What is your take? So questions. What is your take on invoicing versus credit cards? Invoicing is very important if the credit card cannot be charged automatically. So a lot of us that have corporate credit cards, for example, you cannot just subscribe it to an automatic payment. So you have to do it invoicing. So have that option available, but I won't recommend having that option on the monthly type subscription. So only have it on the annual and then allow invoices to be paid by credit cards. I think that would be the most important thing to do as opposed to just having checks as a method of payment. And another question, should we stop sending physical goods if sub-payment have failed? What is the best practice here? Probably. Yeah, because unless you are okay and you believe that you actually have a higher chance of recovery the moment that they receive that box. Include a message in that box that you're sending out there. But I would say that you really should try to make sure that you can have a chance to message user. You should have a chance to either send them something in mail saying, hey, your payment has failed. You have ability to send them an email. You have ability to do something on site. I would not recommend just to continue in service on the physical goods side specifically because it's pretty much is going to be a lost revenue because you only will recover probably half of it anyways. Okay, which are the best target options on Pinterest? Okay, I was gonna say, I don't know. Okay, what is the good benchmark for a voluntary to involuntary churn ratio? Great question. So on your short-term monthlies or one-time purchase for the brand new, so you should have majority of your monthly churn really coming from voluntary. So people actually turning off their auto renew or saying, I do not need you anymore, suspending their service. So monthly base, it should be all voluntary. Annual base is usually split in half. So half of your churn is going to be voluntary, half of your churn will be involuntary in the first couple of terms. And the longer and longer the time goes, once the refunds actually kind of tamper off, if you have refunds, then it's going to be actually moving up to all the way to 80% of your churn on the very late terms that can be voluntary by the term 5, by the year 5 or so. Just because the credit cards are so old at that point, it's pretty much it's guaranteed that they're going to fall into retry. Do you have more time? Okay, so other than credit card export, what are the other reasons of ways in which customers may churn involuntarily? That's the #1 involuntary churn reason that we're track at SurveyMonkey specifically, that we believe is actually big enough to go after. If you have any others, please come to me. I would love to hear about exactly what you're thinking about there. And have you used the expiration date from the credit card to inform customers that their credit card expires, or should they update the card before you try to change it? So that's a loaded question. So if you're a subscription service, do you want to actually tell people before they even renew that the credit card is going to fail? #1, a lot of times, so let's say I pay today and my credit card expires in 2 months. First of all, I don't probably have the credit card even on me yet, the new one. So don't tell me too early. Tell me at least when I know I'm going to have it already. #2, if I'm actually active user of the product, I'll probably will be recovered after the failure anyways. However, you might test it what it's like. It's all about optimization, and it's all about just seeing how much of the revenue you can collect beforehand without even people falling into retry. But I think that's one of the ones that we actually going to try in the next couple of weeks. So it's interesting that this question came up. So the other one is really about if you are just purchase based, so you have some purchase happening, and then so let's say you're using Lyft. Or Uber. So every single time you do a ride, your credit card gets charged. There, be extremely proactive. The moment that you know that the credit card on file is not actually going to be able to process, you need to go after a customer and try to either put an alternative credit card or have it updated. Because there, I completely agree. You have to be as proactive as possible because there's no loss. There's no loss of experience there because you're going to guarantee that the next time they're actually going to have a solid credit card, because it's the worst when you're trying to order Uber or Lyft in the next couple of minutes and your credit card on file has expired or it failed and you have to go there and put it in. And it's just such a delay, it's such a hassle. So proactive communication there is absolutely key. On subscription businesses, just be a little bit more careful and test into it, because you can cause a lot of churn from people saying, oh, that's right, I do have a paid plan, let me cancel. And you don't want to do that necessarily. Okay, and I'll do the last question. What has been the best success rate for payment recapture on prepaid cards? So prepaid cards, that one's interesting. We haven't looked at the first of all, we don't accept prepaid card as a method unless it has a Visa symbol on it, and then it goes into actual normal retry cycling, and we don't have a really good way to recover it unless customer just comes in and updates it. So it's a pure customer success play here, so there's not much that you can do as opposed to just messaging and saying, hey, you need to come and you need to update your payment information in order to do it. Okay, and the last one. Okay, explain a bit of the service provided by SurveyMonkey, please. So for SurveyMonkey, it's a platform to create surveys, and if you need additional features such as if you want to add a logo or have a special customization of your survey, obviously you can upgrade. But the funny part to me is that the SurveyMonkey has been in business for 17 years. We process hundreds of thousands of payments every single month. So for us, it became almost a business unit to just actually optimize that payment processing, and it became big enough to actually for us to pay attention to this as a KPI by itself. Because as you're small, it might not matter, and you just might move a needle here and there, but as you get bigger and bigger in terms of number of payments that you process, it actually becomes almost a point, and this part sits on our growth team at the moment in terms of optimizing payments. Okay, thank you very much. If you have any other questions, catch me, I'll be around. Thank you.